Welcome to Gatecrashers, a podcast dedicated to kicking open the door to your next favorite thing. Our mission, our creed, and our code is this: to make all nerdy things more approachable and accessible to everyone. We want you to find a universe that you'll fall in love with. Today, we'll be chatting about the Heavy Metal Magazine Halloween special hosted by the Boulet brothers. I'm joined by returning guest Steve Foxe, writer of Spider-Ham, No Responsibility, co-writer of Rainbow Bridge and Party and Pray. We also have the other co-writer from those projects, the Steve Orlando of comics, who is currently writing Darkhold for Marvel, as well as King Grimlock, Commanders in Crisis, and so much more. Holy shit, you two are a power duo. How are you?
Good. I'm very pleased that Steve got the other co-writer label for those books.
Well, I got to give you something. It's been almost a decade. No, I'm good. I'm excited to be back, Dan. I feel like it has been a long time, but maybe it hasn't. Maybe just pandemic time. But you can see what I've been doing since then, and it's writing books with Steve Foxe. Usually diametrically opposed books as often as we can. And actually, for folks, we'll break some news here. We actually have 4 collaborations all in 2021 because we're switching hats again. And when the final issue of Razor Blades that Steve co-created comes out, I will have a horror story in there, much as I edited his story in the Boulet brothers Heavy Metal Halloween Takeover. So we've actually just been doing a lot of creative musical chairs this year, and almost all of it is out, but not all of it. So why don't we kick it off before we get into Heavy Metal, Fox? When is that issue out? Our final interwoven creative thing of this year. When is it actually out?
Razor Blades number 5 will be out in early October. We're keeping it.
I said 4. I'm sorry, but it's 5.
Issue 5, our final issue for now. It's going to be early October. Since we James and I self-published this, we like to wait until it's at the distributor before we officially put it on sale, so we don't have like a magic set date. But digital readers for sure will have it in hand by Halloween, and we're hoping subscribers will too.
I actually have 4 sitting next to me back there. Razor Blades has been one of the coolest things for horror in quite a long time. But then I read this and I was like, oh, anthologies are badass. Like, I love them. So you two have both been on the show before, so I can't hit you with the hard-hitting journalism I'm known for our sandwich question. But because it is the spooky season, I want to know what your first horror movie is that you rush to pop on.
Oh, you mean like our go-to horror movie? Ooh, that's a tough one. Actually, so for October, because I'm a big Halloween spooky season guy, I just made a list of 13 horror movies and 13 Halloween crafts and activities and put them on pieces of paper in a plastic pumpkin. And so throughout Halloween, on the nights that my boyfriend and I are both free, we're going to pull one from each pumpkin and go that way. But I actually chose all movies I had never seen before. My go-to, though, for many years, I did watch the original Halloween every Halloween, just as a sort of annual tradition. But now that I live with my boyfriend, he's less keen on rewatching the same film annually. So we switch it up more than we used to.
If you ever want to know why Fox and I, one of the many reasons we could only ever be a creative duo and not a romantic one, it's the word craft that he just said. Like forced crafts, he would come home and his shit would just be on the street in that pumpkin. But his answer is going to be way better than mine on this because I'm like an annual Christmas movie guy. Although similar to him, now that I've been dating someone for the past couple of years, I usually watch. Here's a non sequitur. I usually watch Batman Returns and The Long Kiss Goodnight every Christmas season. But as he noted, that kind of wears people who are not right in your brain down, those types of rituals. So we don't know if that's going to happen this year. But Halloween, so I'm like I don't know. It's probably not even a horror movie. My favorite all around like Halloween watch is probably Evil Dead 2. That's like right in my strike zone because it has both like horror elements, but it's a little camp, it's a little slapstick, it's a little action. And like, who is a Steve Orlando type hero if not Ash Williams? Generally an idiot who's good at only one thing, and that's killing Deadites. So I love that. And I also I love a good, strange, at least I should say ethereal horror movie. So I'll also bring up The Hunger, which I usually end up watching at least once a year. And I do really, really like, first time I ever watched that was actually in college for my Sex, Death, and Vampires literature course. I think my teacher just had a crush on Bowie because he was of that age. But regardless, I would bring up Evil Dead 2, which is like a prototype for me. And I do, having just rewatched it this year, really appreciate The Hunger.
I also have very strong feelings about like what constitutes a Halloween horror movie versus an all-purpose horror movie. My favorite horror movie of all time is the Texas Chainsaw Massacre, which I got to show Steve Orlando for his first time. But that is like sun-baked horror and not to be watched during the month of October.
Can I tell you something, Fox? You actually just imagined that. We've never actually watched it together. So maybe we should do that next week. You just actually
No, I swore I showed you that.
Unless that's a memory from the multiverse. No, you just gesture to the poster every time I'm in your house as if I should have watched it.
Oh, yeah. Maybe I've just condescendingly told you that you should watch it.
Yeah, it's like me and you and the Mask of Zorro. Same thing. But anyway, we'll watch both. We'll watch both next week.
No, it's October. We can't watch it.
Why can't you watch it in October? Because it's summer movie?
Yeah, it's
a light summer rom-com.
Halloween movies need a certain vibe. Like it needs to smell like, crisp autumn leaves, a chill in the air, spooky. Like a Halloween horror movie needs to be spooky. And Texas Chainsaw Massacre, amazing film. I think it's the greatest horror film of all time. It's not spooky. Just like I love Alien. Alien's my favorite movie of all time. That is kind of like iffy for Halloween. I think it's really more of a September or November movie. The Thing, pure December, January, February. October, you really got to zero in on the spooky quality.
Okay.
So Ernest Scared Stupid, Dan, is actually what he's talking about.
Yeah, I mean, you can go full. I'm also a big fan of full camp, sort of like comedic horror, fun horror, slashers all month long. But the pure terror that doesn't have a spooky vibe just doesn't belong in this month. It gets the other 11 months of the year.
Interesting. That's an interesting take. So, all right, now that we're into horror, what appeals to you as creators about horror? Like, why do you want to explore different themes in this genre versus something more, I don't know, straight-laced?
You want to take this one first, Orlando?
I mean, your answer is going to be longer. I like making people uncomfortable, and I feel like you get, I mean, a lot of what I do, I mean, the stuff we have in the heavy metal thing, the Halloween Takeover is less psychological. And I think it is more on the shock splatterhouse side of horror. And I think that that's both right in line with the heavy metal brand, which is to say, be loud, be subversive, get reactions. It's also in line with the Boulet brand of drag, horror, filth, and glamour. And it's also in line with my brand. I tend to be a growling emotions, sort of like grindhouse type writer. I wouldn't say I'm known for my subtlety. So I really enjoy that you can have these messages with horror and you can poke these parts of society, and at least in the stuff that responds to me or I respond to well, pardon me. I mean, it's big and it's loud and it's provocative, and I think that that's always really appealed to me.
Yeah, I mean, I don't have a super academic answer because I think telling stories, creating, art, entertainment, what have you, is about making people feel something. And horror is on one of the extremes of what you can feel, terror, fright, existential dread, shock, disgust. They're very powerful emotions. They're kind of like, second step emotions from more basic stories. And I think that there's just so much versatility in the genre. You can take it so many places. Like we've already talked about, you can go for the sort of fun sheer as the blood spills, or you can go for, this is going to disturb me for months every time I think about it once the lights go off. And I think trying to explore the different corners and crevices of what horror has to offer is just something that can keep a creator busy their entire life.
That might be a difference between me and Fox, actually, because I'll be the first to admit I don't love slashers, because I like to listen. A jump scare is going to work every time, literally every time, but I don't necessarily think there's a lot to it. So I actually find that experience unpleasant in a way that isn't provocative. Like, I mean, if I walked around the door and my boyfriend slapped me in the face 10 times out of 10, it would be shocking to me. But like, so I do tend to like things, weirdly, the things that respond to me are, well, more like, as he said, or as the Wikipedia for Texas Chainsaw Massacre says, where like the images linger, you see things that are unsettling, but it's not like they pop out of nowhere. And so I don't necessarily always respond to the same type of things. I think that like the jump scare to me is kind of lowbrow, and I don't like, even though I'm normally a lowbrow guy. But conversely, I'll be the first to say that sometimes when there's scary elements and the X factor's missing, things tend to end up feeling almost just like dark fantasy to me. Like good examples of this are The Exorcist and the new version of It, both of which I liked. But to me, those were basically just like dark fantasy stories. They weren't necessarily scary. They were engrossing. And so I guess what I'm saying is my Venn diagram for horror is quite small, whereas Fox's is quite generous.
Yeah, and I do think there's fun and entertainment in a whole range. For instance, if I saw you turn around the corner and your boyfriend slapped you, I would be entertained. So sometimes it's just about perspective and enjoying someone else's misery and misfortune.
You visit my house so often. Like, how many times could you possibly have seen that?
Boston's a long trip, man.
Yeah, it's a lot longer coming from New York to Boston, strangely, than going from Boston to New York. I don't know how that works, but I don't make physics. I don't make geography, so it's fine. Yeah, clearly we can go off topic wildly. Suffice to say, somewhere in the middle, that's where I think both of our anthologies lie. Although I do think Razorblades tends to veer towards more sort of the psychological aspects, and we definitely went for Gonzo in the Boulet takeover.
Yeah, a big point of Razorblades when James and I created it, and something we've tried to hold throughout all 5 issues, is trying to do something, saying you're going to do something new is a bold claim in any genre, especially one as well traveled as horror. But we didn't want to look backward too often. There's so many fun anthologies that are a little campier or more nostalgic, like the eerie, creepy sort of stuff like that. So Razorblades has been about trying to find like new parameters for terror and new angles on things. But I love that there's such a wide market out there, that there are also projects that do throw back to things like creepy and eerie and, the old EC comics, and also stuff that has never gone out of publication, like heavy metal, that can explore other aspects of the genre.
So with this special, how did both of you get involved?
I mean, I was there from the start. The Boulets and I approached heavy metal together as a way to sort of combine our power, if you want to say that. And it's mostly their power, obviously. But it just seemed to make sense on this end. Heavy metal, known for being provocative, known for being sort of an underground sci-fi magazine for years. And in a similar way, that's how the Boulets brand came up, when they were concert promoters. And then, their TV show Dragula was originally a live contest that they would run. And so they felt like they were on parallel tracks, and the type of work they do seemed to be similarly toothy. Because I was already working at heavy metal, doing an ongoing called Starward there, it just seemed to make sense to me to put these two tastes together and then see what they tasted like after. And it turns out they taste great. With that in mind, to fully bring it around, I wouldn't know about the Boulets if not for Fox, who was the first person to show me their show, which was midway through season 3 when I was at his house a couple of years ago. So, I met them, through industry connections, and we became friends, but I wouldn't have even known who they were without Steve. So of course, once this book got off the ground, one of the first people that I wanted to reach out to take part in it was, in fact, Steve and Andrew Foxe.
Yeah, I can definitely take partial credit for pointing Steve Orlando toward kind of the world of drag as a whole. You weren't as much of a fan or purveyor when we first met, but between me and your boyfriend, you've certainly become more of an enthusiast. And I've been such a big fan of Dragula since season 1. And I came about through seeing performances from Vander Van Odd, who won the first season of the show. Spoiler alert. 4 seasons later. And
way to go, Dick.
Having been able to see Vander perform many times and see other Dragula queens and kings and performers, and meet the Boulets at DragCon and other events, it's been a very cool full circle moment to actually get to share this magazine with them and with queens like Katya in Alaska and Evie. I've been a Drag Race fan since the beginning as well. So it's just kind of a pinch me moment to see that I'm in a table of contents with all of these people.
With drag, like I don't know a ton about drag, so me coming to this, I was reading all these names and having to ask my girlfriend who all these people are. Has there always been a big crossover between drag and horror? Like, it seems like a lot of these themes are there.
I would say that there is an element of taboo and counterculture that has existed for a very long time. I mean, if you go back to like John Waters movies are not necessarily horror, but they get shelved alongside pretty often, and Divine was sort of his muse. So you've always had alternative performers. You've always have had performers who are on the fringes of the mainstream. And certainly when you look at like 80s and 90s club culture and alternative culture, which is where the Boulets got their start, it's always been present. I think a lot of more mainstream fans of drag would point to certain Drag Race queens and think like, oh, so-and-so kicked this off. And no, it's always been there, but different people throughout the mainstreaming of drag have helped bring that to the forefront. And I would include Evie in that. She's not necessarily like horror first in her drag, but she brought a more alternative side to Drag Race when she won season 11. Again, spoilers for 4 seasons ago. But the Boulets did kind of kick it to a whole nother level with Dragula by doing a show focused on that and focus on like the core tenets as well, because Dragula is not just about, oh, are you a spooky queen? Are you a scary performer? Are you blood and guts? It's really kind of about embracing that taboo counterculture spirit and not being afraid to bristle against the mainstream. So it's always been there. It's kind of a aspect of queer culture that I love and that I'm glad hasn't been sanded off over the years. Period. It sounded like an ellipsis, but that was a period.
Working with...
Spoken by the most conflict-averse person I've ever met in my life.
So with Heavy Metal Magazine, were there freedoms you don't typically get with kind of like company-owned work?
I mean, there's a ton of freedom, and I think that comes with the heavy metal brand. Though to be clear, like a lot of that comes in making sure what's on the package with the book. Steve and I have done a slasher, which we'll talk about a little later. We did a queer slasher book at Aftershock, and that was pretty raucous, and Aftershock was totally behind it. But the key was like they knew what they were buying. It's not like we pitched them Rainbow Bridge, and then we had like dog contestants everywhere. You knew what you were getting with Party and Pray, and you knew, and we knew what we were doing, pitching a Halloween takeover to heavy metal. This is the magazine of the Lochnar. This is the magazine of Tarna. These are stories that are always going to be shocking in their boldness and full of surprise twists and surprise turns. And so we knew, looking at the past 300 some odd issues of heavy metal, that we could pretty much go wherever we wanted. And that's a fit, knowing we were going to bring in all of these different drag queens, as well as professional wrestlers and horror film and TV directors. These are people that are used to telling their stories as they see fit. And so by that token, like heavy metal was the perfect place to do this because barring extreme circumstances, everybody got to do exactly what they want to do. And this is what I tell people, it's not as though you get a story starring Katya in the Katya story, for example, or you get a story starring Alaska, but the feel of these things is all due to the freedom that these creators have is completely in line with their brand. This isn't a story starring Katya Samolochkova, but it is 100% a story that was by Katya. It has all the tenets of her style, her sense of humor, her type of physical story or performative storytelling, and that goes for all of these things. These stories are not interchangeable. You have so much freedom to be who you want to be at heavy metal that we can bring Alaska in and she can go completely everywhere she wants to go and tell a story that's 100% Alaska while being all new. And that goes for all the creators, from me to Fox to someone like Danhausen, who the flavor of whose story is completely different than anybody else's. That stuff like that can really only happen at a place like heavy metal.
So, Fox, do you want to talk a little bit about your story? And I did want to ask what it was like working with Isaac Goodman on that, because I think you're friends.
Sure. Yeah, Isaac and I are very close friends. He, Teeny Howard, and Phil Seavey and I all won the same Top Cow talent hunt the same year. And we became friends through that. And alongside Ryan Cady, who was an editor at a time. So it's kind of like the peer group I've come up with in comics in a lot of ways. Isaac also lived in Queens near me for a while. So we're good friends in real life. And we've collaborated on other projects before. He's also become a huge drag fanatic over lockdown. So when this came up, and he and his partner Danielle binged like every episode of any drag related TV show possible. And he's even done like merch for Queens. So when this opportunity came up, I contacted him right away, and he's always down to do any sort of project I bring his way. He was in Razor Blades 2 as well. So mine's a pretty short story, but I latched onto the story of the woman who designed the Creature from the Black Lagoon mask. The Creature from Black Lagoon is one of my favorite horror movies of all time. Just one of my favorite movies of all time. And the woman who designed it, I believe her name's Millicent Patrick. I could be misremembering, but I think that's right. She was kind of lost to time for a while. In the old Hollywood system, a woman would not necessarily get as much credit as was due for her contributions to such an iconic, lasting monster. But she's become more known in recent years. And I combine that with the idea of hag horror, which was kind of a subgenre decades ago, once actresses aged out of being able to have the romantic roles or the leading lady roles or even like the mother or the bride roles, there was this brief moment in time where you would see these iconic actresses playing kind of like haggard, old, wicked women. And the Boulets have talked about it before on their podcast as being a subgenre that they have a lot of affection for. So when this came up, I thought of that and connected those two and got Isaac to whip up something nasty.
It was a fantastic story. I was lucky enough to get to read all of these last night, and I was expecting some raunchiness to this whole thing, but I was like, wow, this is incredible. Orlando, how was it writing with Danhausen? That scary dude seems to love horror. I just learned about him in the past couple of months since I've gotten into wrestling.
Well, Danhausen, so very different. The stories I co-wrote with the Boulets very different than the story I co-wrote with Danhausen. But the nice thing is just like these queens, Danhausen knows what a Danhausen story is, and even though he doesn't appear in it, like his sort of interest and talent transcends his specific gig, just like I would say about all the queens involved in this and everyone else. So, I mean, I was really entertained by the brief he sent me. My job there was basically to help him realize his vision, which is kind of my job throughout this entire book, because I co-edited the whole thing. And yeah, I mean, we're already friends. Danhausen is a huge comic book fan. He is like texting me about Dr. Doom pretty frequently. And we ended up just connecting. I think we did an interview together like a year ago, and we've sort of stayed in touch after that. but yeah, I knew it would be a fun time. We had great success when he did a cover for Commanders in Crisis. And I think it was the right type of energy when I offered this to him, because if I remember, he was almost intimidated. You're like, oh yeah, I mean, we know as creators, like the blank pages. The most intimidating thing as a wrestler, I think, and I'm editorializing here, but I think you kind of at least have something to go off of, because who you're working with. So when I was like, you can literally do whatever you want, like the fun thing and the hardest thing was actually just whittling through how many pitches he had, because they were all great ideas. But when I saw the thing about Van Belton, I was just like, and knowing that Dan Henig considers himself like a satanic Conan O'Brien, I knew this was a home run for this story, and he killed it. It's beautifully illustrated and all that stuff, all the dialogue and everything right out of his mouth. And he did a great job.
With these different kind of creative people who aren't typically on the page, as you've been saying, it translates really well. Was that easy to do? Because I know you were co-editing a lot of these stories. Was it easy for these people to kind of make the next step from being a performer to putting on a page?
I mean, they all did great. I mean, the challenge is not, and these are all storytellers, by the way. If you're a pro wrestler, you're a storyteller. Obviously, if you're a a TV and movie director, you're a storyteller. But if you're a drag queen, you're also a storyteller. Each one of those performances is a story. So coming up with the ideas and the hooks and the concepts, that was all like exciting and I don't want to say easy, because I'm putting myself in their heads, but it seemed to be a great creative moment that didn't offer many hurdles. The hurdle, of course, is just knowing how to put that in a comic book format, but that's what I'm there for. Because by the way, like if you threw me on a drag stage and told me to walk around in heels with no prior training, it would be challenging as well. And so what I was there to take these ideas they had and guide them through the process of turning that into a comic script. But luckily I've been doing that one way or another almost my whole life. So that part was easy for me. So it's confluence of talents, I guess you could say. But yeah, I think they found the format intimidating, but that's natural. I would find doing what they do intimidating if I was thrown in the deep end. Luckily I was here to be the life preserver.
So with this issue kind of following a classic horror anthology type of host storyline, I know, Steve, you do Razor Blades. How do you feel anthologies work for comics of this type? Do you think it's better to have these types of stories be shorter and be able to fit more into one issue rather than letting them be their own full issues?
I think that the story, whenever possible, and this goes for any medium, but especially comics, the story should dictate the form. And so, for instance, in Razor Blades, we don't have a set page length per story. It's someone comes to us and they say, yeah, ours is 10 pages. We do our best to make 10 pages happen. If they say they have a 1-page strip they want to do, we've got 1 page for them. So it's nice to have some sort of guideline and some sort of structure, but you really want the story to kind of lead you to the format, especially in something like horror. One of the reasons there are so many great anthology movies, television shows, short story collections is that sometimes you really just want to get in and out of the premise as quickly as you can, in and out of the twist or the fright or the scare or the monster or whatever. It can be hard to sustain heightened feelings over a long period of time. I think that's why you see stuff like, The Haunting of Hill House or what have you on Netflix. You have to go to a lot of places that aren't as scary to get to the scary parts, because you can't really have like 10 hours of fear. Like you would just expire an hour in. But I love the anthology format. I wish that the American market was healthier for it overall. A lot of people in comics would complain that it's not as healthy as it could be for anthologies here compared to some other places around the world. We have some that have stuck it out for the long haul, and other times you see them flash in and out for a couple of years of fleeting brilliance. But no one ever fully gives up the ghost. When James and I did Razor Blades, it wasn't because we thought, oh yeah, the market is ripe for an anthology right now, we're going to make $1 billion. It was because we love that format and we love what it's capable of. and we wanted to do it to the best of our ability.
So, Steve, I have to call it by your last names. Orlando, you co-edited a lot of this, and Fox, you serve as the editor for pretty much one of the biggest comics out there right now with Department of Truth. As editors, how do you work with writers? Like, what do you feel your style is? Are you giving more pointed feedback, or are you helping push people to where you think the story could be?
Well, actually, I imagine Steve Orlando and I have very different answers for this, because his role as editor for something like this is kind of akin, Steve, correct me if I'm wrong, but more of like co-writer and curator. Whereas on Department of Truth, I am sort of a project manager and editor. My job there is to help James tell the best version of James's story. My job is not to tell the Steve Fox version of James's story or to push him toward someone else's version of his story. It's to bring out the version of the story he wants to tell in the clearest, cleanest, most successful way possible. And when I work with creators on Razor Blades, where I have different levels of involvement, sometimes it's kind of like sign up and they're off to the races. And sometimes I'm working with someone to go from a rough premise to a finished product. It's really about bringing out their ideal version of the story. I also edit for First Second. I edit children's books, children's comics for them. So in that case too, it's working with the creators to make sure what's in their mind gets onto the page in the way that the intended audience is going to receive it as well as possible.
So Fox is actually 100% right. What he described is always the job of an editor. But what I would say is that, as he predicted, it looks a lot, and as he said himself with Razor Blades, like that can look like a lot of different things. Both of our jobs is to help people tell the best version of their story and not just morph it into our version of it. However, as he alluded to, that can be, when you're dealing with folks that have never written comics before, then that means taking, a stronger hand than if you're working with like a Tynan who's written at least a couple comics. But the job is always the same. The job, in my case, talking to these folks and whittling these things down, asking the right questions and finding the best version of the story they want to tell and helping them say what they want to say. That's my job, and that's Fox's job. But what changes in regards to that is dictated by the person you're working with. Again, like, I don't think that's not like, oh, comics are uniquely hard. If I had to go and lip sync for my life, I would certainly need someone helping me to put my makeup on, like I couldn't just jump in. So and make me the best version of my drag self. So the job is always the same if you know what editing is, and we both do. But how it plays out, there's 100,000, they're stated different ways. Because there's, it's different depending on every single creator, not just on my book versus it, but it's different even within that.
Yeah, at First Second, I've worked with people who have never written a comic book script before. I've worked with people who have only ever worked in webcomics and have never structured something as like one single standalone graphic novel. And I've worked with people who've written, 15 graphic novels. So it does vary so much, but the core of the job, like Steve said, it is very much the same.
So let's get on to you as coworkers. How do you like to work? Would you prefer to work in the same room if the world permit, or is it something where you want to be virtual, passing back and forth?
Man. So the way Steve Orlando works would send me to a mental asylum within 30 minutes. My ideal work environment is a sensory deprivation tank in a desert, as far away from humanity as possible.
That's also his ideal social environment.
If there is a bird that is chirping too melodically, it can throw me off. Whereas Steve will watch 3 movies simultaneously while texting me and writing his script.
It's 100% true. I can't disagree with anything Fox just said.
That's a lot.
But that's also because I think we learned to write in different places. Fox was in between writing on his dead journal, was just locked in his attic when he was learning how to write. But I just wrote my first books in the back of a crowded Denny's in upstate New York. So like I do lose my mind if it's dead silent. And that is pretty much all the time. But especially when I'm trying to work, I need like a baseline white noise so that I can just like surf above it. And you know, I do know, like, even when I'm at Fox's house and we are both working, we must have separate rooms because mine has like something on my computer and he's like locked in the fucking tower from Tangled. I don't know. His dream. But
I bought noise canceling headphones, the kind that like airline baggage handlers use on the tarmac, so that when my boyfriend is streaming 2 doors away or playing a video game, 30 feet away, 2 rooms away, I can block out any semblance of noise to concentrate. Yeah. And even I wish they were thicker.
That's a lot. that is a very certain way to work. Oh man. It's very funny that you're both such different people, but you work so well together. But I think that's kind of how this stuff works.
We also work very differently project to project. So we've done a number of books together, some that you've seen and some that you haven't. And we've never worked exactly the same way twice, even on Party and Pray and Rainbow Bridge, which we were writing simultaneously, alternating chapters. We did each book in a different method, which sounds wilder than it was. It was very intuitive. But so as rigid as we are in some things, we are flexible in other realms.
So the Hawk and Dove of comics, basically, I am clearly Hawk. Let me just, I will eat I'll eat every like negative side. Like I'm definitely, I'm from the Terran universe. I'm from the Demir universe and I'm Hawk. That's fine.
So, okay. It's absolutely wild to me that you wrote both of those back to back at the same time, flipping, because one deals with something super heavy and the other deals with something super heavy, but in completely different ways. Okay. So let's get the heavier one out first. I got to check out Party and Pray last night and it was fantastic. It was a lot to like read through. I'm gonna have to go back and read it again. It was brilliant. I don't know if you're calling it a horror story, but it's very much scary.
Thank you. Yeah, I've been saying horror thriller. Yeah, it kind of feels more like a thriller to me. But as we know from my Halloween tirade, I'm kind of a purist with some genre terms.
If there's not like candy that has like that mythical apple that has weed inside it or something, like he's not.
Weed costs a lot of money.
He's not on board.
That whole thing is so funny to me.
I used to give out fried eggs in a bag underneath a mountain of candy on Halloween. That's how much I don't like Halloween. I think I just maybe nuked my friendship with Fox, but it's been nuked before. So, like Wolverine, you can't kill that shit. But.
I'm recoiling from fried eggs. You sound like Grandpa Simpson. Like, what was that?
I might have actually been taken from an episode of Simpsons because I wasn't that creative in middle school, but it was like some dude who I didn't like came to my house. So I was like, I'm going to get this motherfucker. So I had the fried eggs in a plastic bag, but I piled the candy on, right? And he like sat next to me in, I don't know, home ec, whatever the hell I was in 7th grade. So I knew that I was the one that had given them these eggs, but we were talking about Halloween the next day, and he was complaining about how some asshole had given him fried eggs in a bag. And I was just resplendent with myself. But that only happened once, one Halloween. So, like I'm a pretty normal guy.
So back to Party and Pray.
I was going to take it back to Party and Pray. I mean, this book was like, I mean, I'm glad to hear you say that you enjoyed it, Dan. It was certainly like dancing through the raindrops in the right kind of challenging way, right? Because there's a lot of fiery themes involved in Party and Pray. And at the end of the day, like Fox and I both love these provocative like 80s slasher movies, but it's not as though they couldn't be improved upon. Yeah. in many ways. So like we wanted to do something that was just that raw and provocative, but not necessarily as Steve is going to kill me for saying this, like thoughtless with its social themes. I guess I would say, like, you know, we wanted to make you feel like you're watching the end of Sleepaway Camp without actually being so as exploitative as the end of Sleepaway Camp. And hopefully we got there.
So that's actually where I'm going. The afterword is what has stuck with me since reading it. Like I've been thinking about it all day and kind of ruminating on it. You talk about how being part of the queer community, like you're supposed to quote unquote always show the best side of your community, but you shouldn't feel pressured to do that. And in this, you're showing what, I don't want to say what really is, but what really can be. Is there something that you keep in mind when you're trying to write stories like this that explore darker themes in a community you're a part of? Wow, that was hard to say.
No, well, yeah,
I keep in mind, like I'm excited for Fox to agree with me here. This is one of the few, which almost never happens, but like, I would argue this is one of the few instances where he is the bigger asshole. So usually the motion in this book was him going to like a 13 and me saying we should maybe dial it back to a 9, or at least counter with a negative 13 in some instances. So I'm very excited for an extended Fox soliloquy because in one of the rare instances of our friendship, I was the nice one, which almost never happens.
I would say you were the cautious one. And there were moments where we had like full blown fights over Party and Pray, which is, you know, a healthy part of any relationship. But yeah, it's kind of exactly what you said. I bristle at the expectation that as a member of a marginalized community, you must always be putting your best face forward, because it makes me question, who is that best face for? Is it for respectability politics? Is it for the goal of heteronormativity? What are we getting out of this? Is it to pretend that bad things don't happen? Because they do. And I do feel that pretending bad things don't happen allow them to happen more often. And I also, even sort of stepping back from too like lofty or grand of social statement, I think as a marginalized creator, especially over the past decade, we can point again and again to times where you get your foot in the door because of a specific opportunity, and then it's difficult to branch out from that. And a lot of my fear and anxiety at the beginning of my career was, am I going to be the gay writer? Like, is that going to be the role prescribed to me where, okay, I can get my foot in the door telling a happy gay story, but will I ever get to write, you know, Captain America or a horror story that has nothing to do with sexuality, or, you know, a book about dogs in the afterlife? Or will people expect a certain story from me? And I know that's something that Steve Orlando has had to wrestle with throughout his career as well. So I think that those two things kind of came to a head in Party and Pray, where I wanted to tell this taboo feeling story. I wanted to show a grungier, riskier side of things, because that is an aspect of reality. The queer community is not a monolith, and we don't all look like Neil Patrick Harris, you know, doing our best song and dance. And I think that those stories are worthwhile too. And I think those stories can be entertaining, illuminating, enlightening, fun, thrilling, what have you. I just think that any opportunity any of us have to kind of push at the boxes we get put in is an opportunity I want to be able to take.
I never had to think about that because I'm not in these spaces, but it's very interesting that you were afraid of being shoehorned, because you're...
that's also because he's watched me be shoehorned on and off for the past 6 years. So in the fact that both of our boyfriends have normal jobs and we are functionally office mates across a 400-mile expanse, he's got to see that in real time, and my complete lack of anxiety related to it, which I definitely don't have. So,
or even if you look at, like, you know, the big two is not the end all be all of comics, but if you look at the number of times that women creators have gotten to write male characters, it's like minuscule. if you look at the times that Black creators have gone to write non-Black characters, it's frighteningly rare. So I don't think it's exclusive to the queer community. And sometimes there's a good intent behind it, because these companies are like, we want to tell more authentic stories. These are the creators we look to. But I also think they should look to us for other sorts of stories. And, Party and Pray is a queer story, but it's not one that's going to pat you on the back and say, this is good, this is great, everything about being queer is fantastic. Steve and I do those kind of stories in other books, but Party and Pray was our chance to say, yeah, there's, dark sides to this too. But the point of the book is not to say, hey, being gay can be deadly and scary. The point of the book is to say that there are bad actors everywhere. And within these communities, there are people who know how to take care of each other and take care of themselves.
Wow. Sometimes people give me answers where I'm like, I have to sit for a second, but glad to have you here. So another heavy one, switch over from this to another one. You also wrote Rainbow Bridge, which deals with losing a pet. Super heavy topic. Wasn't ready for that. When I saw Rainbow Bridge, my brain hadn't yet learned about the Rainbow Bridge as an idea. So I was like, oh, cool. Foxe and Orlando wrote a dog book. Fuck. What made you want to write this story? Was it a hope that this would help someone through this type of situation? Or how did you approach this?
Well, the idea started with Orlando, so he should take this one.
Well, that's true. I did have the initial idea of what if the Rainbow Bridge was the Bifrost, and that's what I sent Foxe, because something you guys folks should also know is that I'm constantly texting Foxe log lines, and this was one of them, or high concept, I should say, not log lines, but this was one of them, and at the time, we didn't really know what it was. There's a world where this could have been like Legend or the Never-Ending Story, which were nominally fantasy, but also surprisingly dark. And we took it in this other direction. But that said, a lot of the animated films that appealed to me when I was younger still had an element of darkness to them, which is for me Land Before Time and All Dogs Go to Heaven. All Dogs Go to Heaven, clearly an inspiration for this book. Ours is probably even nicer than that, a movie that opens with dogs getting hit by cars. But it was a big movie for me when I was younger. So I guess what I'm saying is we wanted to tell a story that was for a younger crowd, but appealing to everyone. And part of the way you do that is you recognize that, there is going to be darkness in life. There's going to be trauma in life, but you can overcome it. And I think that's classic young adult storytelling. I mean, even Bambi has to watch is Bambi a guy or a girl? I don't even know. Even they have to watch their mom get shot. And then you find out that there can be life and happiness after. So from the start, when we decided this is going to be a young adult or middle grade book, Foxe will tell me which one it really is. There was always still going to be that hump to get over, because that's life, and even in this, we wanted to do something was affirming, but still addressed that there are challenges that a lot of us face, and we got to hop over those motherfuckers.
Yeah, great language for discussing our middle grades, right? My background is in children's literature. I worked at Random House for several years as a kids editor, and I still work at First Second. And kids want real stories, they want real emotions and they want real topics. And something like Rainbow Bridge, which sits at the nexus between middle grade and young adult, that is an age where you are experiencing things as strongly as you've ever felt them in your life, because the gravity of things starts to set in. You're able to comprehend that, some things are forever, like losing a friend. And things are not fleeting feelings. These are feelings that you have to reckon with for a long time. But I will say too, and I've said this every time I've gotten a chance to talk about Rainbow Bridge, it is first and foremost a celebration of the friendship that you have between a human and a pet. It is one last adventure for a human and an animal. It's not Old Yeller or Where the Red Fern Grows. Because I got kind of
Shiloh. Let's name drop Shiloh as well, a big book from in middle school. Hello.
Yeah, I mean,
also, my dog wants to be part of this podcast.
Yeah, Steve also has a corgi, which is part of the genesis of this. But I got a little nervous as like release crept up because I kept seeing people saying like, "Oh, this looks great, but I don't think I could read it." And it's like, no, please, you can read it. I promise. There's no trauma on the page. It opens with the dog. The main dog has passed away recently.
Yeah.
But we
had very different responses to that, by the way. This is why I let Fox handle most of our public facing statements.
Oh yeah, Steve Orlando had more like irrational anger that people couldn't handle it, and I was like, "But I'm a softie too. I understand."
Yeah. I was like, "Get tough, jump in."
But it's an adventure story, and it always started as an adventure story. Like Steve Orlando said, there is a possibility that this was going to go in more of like a Conan the Barbarian direction. I'm very happy it didn't. Well, an early version had the corgi having battle armor.
Oh,
so
shit, though.
I'm glad it went where it did. Valentina Brancati, the artist, and Manuel Papo, the colorist, they brought this world to life in such a beautiful, animated, fluid way. It's impossible to picture the book any other way now. But it is an adventure story, and that's really where we started because we're both dog people. I have a dog, a Chihuahua mix, and there was a weird coincidence where the day of the final approval, Steve was at the vet for something fairly urgent with his dog, who was fine. And I was at the vet for a pretty serious dental thing with my dog, and she's fine now. But it was a weird feeling to like be reading this final pass while we're both at vets texting each other. And but it's a special book, and I'm glad we got to do it.
So I have one more for each of you. Fox, how do you go from writing things that are very horror to then going to writing something like Spider-Ham? Like seeing...
He's a vegan. It's still a horror movie. It's still a horror book for him.
Like seeing your body of work is so interesting to me because like I can't wait for somebody to pick up. And I'm sorry for you, but I can't wait for someone to pick up something like Rainbow Bridge or Spider-Ham and then be like, "Oh, let me check out Cheater Code," and like have that experience.
Hold on. Cheater Code is not written by Steve Fox. It's written by the completely different person, S.A. Fox.
Fun fact.
And I refuse to acknowledge any other reality. So
I did have a bookseller friend tell me recently that he ordered in Cheater Code without having looked at it too closely, and it was briefly stocked in children's graphic novels.
Incredible.
So not great. Glad it's wrapped in cellophane when it comes from the publisher. But yes, that is why I have a brown bag. That is why I have a pseudonym for that specific release. But yeah, I mean, I always say my career kind of makes no sense. I just decided to never choose a lane.
That's awesome.
I love storytelling for kids. I love superheroes. I love horror. I love telling gay stories in very different variations. So I don't know. I've just kind of never picked one or the other. And I think that comics does have a unique ability to let creators jump lanes. Certainly there are people in movies and novels and other things who do vastly different projects, but I don't think with the same frequency that you see in comics where someone can go from writing, like you say, Spider-Ham to a horror anthology to a drag themed, heavy metal issue. And, no one stopped me yet. So hopefully no one does.
I also have a pen name that I use for my more successful work. You might have heard of it. It's L. Ewing.
Dude writes everything.
I just slum it as Steve Orlando.
Steve, I realized as we're recording, I haven't gotten to talk to you since Kill a Man. What was the origin of that with you and Philip Kennedy Johnson? Like, where did that book come from?
Also from me, originally, but actually very similar to the things that have brought Fox and I together in that, first of all, I love co-writing. Like I love writing for myself. I'm a huge egotist. But I also actually, contrary to being a huge egotist, I really like co-writing because you get something that is better than either of the person would do, on on their own, or I should say at least different. I like to think better and more unique. So when it came to Rainbow Bridge, it was like, oh, I want to tell this story and I want to try to do something for a younger audience. Let me work with Foxe, who is a master at that stuff and ran the show for that stuff for a long time. And it was the same nugget with Party and Pray, where I knew that Foxe was more of a horror guy. I had this arc and I had the character work, but beyond that, like I wanted to make sure that these beats were as authentic and pleasing as possible for the audience. And that's, how we came together on both of those books. And the same is true for Kill a Man. I am a huge, I love UFC, I love pro wrestling, and I love especially the first and we don't want to talk about all the middle movies, but like Rocky and then Rocky Balboa and Creed, I really enjoy. We don't even want to talk about Creed 2, actually. But I wanted to, Creed really moved me. It's one of my favorite movies ever, and it's easily my favorite movie of 2015. And it's because I was excited to see the Black community, audiences of color in general, but the Black community specifically, get a hero in the vein of Rocky, someone, especially in Rocky and Creed, that, I guess, spoilers for either a 6 or a 50-year-old movie, who doesn't win at the end on anyone's terms but their own. And to me, that message is so much more real than in all the sequels where they're like, oh, I got a belt and everything is solved. Well, no, in real life, everything is not solved. In real life, all you can do is go the distance, literally, because then we die. And that's not meant to sound morbid. I find those stories inspiring because these are people who win by going the distance and by succeeding on their own terms, becoming a winner and a champion on their own terms. So, because those are the only terms we really have, and that we can really afford to listen to. So I wanted to create that type of story for one of my own communities. And once that came together, I knew that I wanted the queer elements, of course, to be authentic, and I could deliver that. I'm more used than a tissue, so I got plenty of stories. But I wanted the combat sports elements to be as authentic as possible too, because I didn't want this to just be for the queer community. I wanted it to. Look, it's comics, folks. It's not like we're solving world hunger, but like I wanted to build bridges between genres, and I knew that this would be the first sports book that many a queer reader would read, and I knew this would be the first queer book that many a sports fan would read, and I wanted it all to be approachable and relatable. So that's why I brought in Philip, who does mixed martial arts himself. He's also one of my best friends, and I knew that with him at the helm, we could make something that was authentic to both communities. And we could also make something that was relatable to both communities and wasn't so far into jargon in either direction, while still saying things that were new, that we would scare people away. And that's a very specific goal to this book. Sometimes we'll do books. Party and Pray is deep, deep, deep in queer lingo and lore. Kill a Man was not the book to have long conversations about douching. That's other books. But we did want to still talk about things for the first time and in ways that will build bridges and humanize people that maybe haven't thought about other communities before. So that's why Philip was brought on, because he knows the combat sports world, and he's an amazing writer himself. And honestly, when we figured out talking about doing something that's better than either of us could do on our own, the ending of the book was what neither he nor I planned originally. And we both were on each other so bad about it and our individual goals for it that we ended up getting what we came up with. And I was so moved when we better than what I wanted to do, authentic, both on the mixed martial arts side and the queer side. And that wouldn't happen if I was just doing this by myself. Certainly wouldn't happen if Philip was doing it by himself. So that's why I brought him in, and that idea paid itself forward. It's one of my favorite books I've done, and you wouldn't have gotten what you did if it was just either of us alone.
You broke up there for a little bit. It's okay though.
Yeah, you sounded like Daft Punk on my end. It's kind of sick.
Cool, actually.
Sick beats, bro. I myself am the dankest.
So, the Heavy Metal Boulet Brothers Takeover comes out on October 27th. What other projects do you have that people should be picking up, and where can they get them?
Spider-Ham, Great Power, No Responsibility just came out from Scholastic Graphics and Marvel. You can grab that anywhere. Razor Blades issue 5 will be out in October. You can go to readrazorblades.com or subscribe to James Tynan's newsletter. What else? I did a short last year for TKO Presents called Night Train, and I just found out that the trade paperback collection of all of their short comics so far is going to go up for pre-order the first Monday in October. So some amazing shorts. Obviously, I'm very proud of my own, but some amazing ones from other creators like Alex Packnadel, Liana Kangas, Ian McEwen. You should
Foxes is the best, though. Let me give an unbiased opinion. I haven't read them all, but Foxes is in fact the superior short. He won't say that, but I'm here to say that.
So good.
Very kind. Lissandro Esterin, amazing artist. Patricio Delpi, colorist. Steve Wan's letterer. Very cool to work with all of them. But yeah, so you can pick up the entire collection of those from TKO's website. Later in the month, the Boulet brother Takeover issue, of course. And then in the beginning of November, Adventure Kingdom, the kids series I write for Epic, is coming out in print form. So if you haven't read that, on the side of my younger stuff, you can pick that up as a collected printed book. I think November 5th, maybe.
I love November 5th. I don't have anything coming out, so just buy Fox's books. There's ones we're in together. No, I have to self-aggrandize. So like he alluded to, we have the Boulet Takeover, we have Razor Blades, where we're both there making trouble. What else is going on, man? We have Darkhold, which just started this week from Marvel. Finally, my first Marvel work chronologically, but not my first Marvel work on the shelves. But it's back. Amazing art by Kian Tormey, some wild one-shots, especially the Iron Man one, which is like full-on Iron Man body horror coming out after this. Before we wrap it up with Darkhold Omega, there is a surprise debut in that book. And amazing art by Kian. And look, it's just like, it's Scarlet Witch and Doctor Doom being themselves, making trouble, kicking ass. And I'm super proud of that. I think next week, I'm also in the Wonder Woman 80th anniversary issue, story that I'm doing with Laura Braga and Ram Fajardo, who is the colorist from my Wonder Woman runs. Laura and I, this is actually the whole team that did Wonder Woman 51, which the internet says was one of the best Wonder Woman one-shots ever. So, no pressure to us, but I'm really proud of that story. It's set vaguely in the 90s era. So you get Artemis, you get Hippolyta, you get Nubia, and you, of course, being a story by me, you also get to throw back to the 1930s. So you should check that out. Search for Who is also coming out right now, a book from Aftershock. That I'm doing with John Sway on the topic of co-writing. This is a Jewish-Chinese action thriller that's coming out monthly. Amazing art by Rubin Kubies, and just redefining the action genre and like uncovering a part of history that neither John nor I knew about before we came together. That's in progress now. Starward, as I hinted at, is coming. It's serialized in heavy metal. This is my magical girl transformation, story for someone who is, part of his queer upbringing was Sailor Moon in a very strong way. And this is that, but with more than a touch of my style of strange Grant Morrison cosmogony. That's coming out serialized right now from heavy metal. And there's probably more too. Oh, Transformers King Grimlock is coming out from IDW, which is basically Grimlock the Barbarian. Just a rock and roll story that is midway through, and I'm super, super pumped about. Like my favorite Transformer in a fantasy world, cutting things up, shooting fire, very, very exciting. And man, also, there might even be. Is there more, Fox? Am I forgetting?
We forgot to explicitly restate Party and Pray. Party and Pray is out.
Party and Pray is out.
First week in October. Alex Sanchez and Juancho on art. Ha Satsmanelhao on letters. We talk so much about it on the pod, so if you've listened this far, you already know what it's about, but you can actually go grab it.
That's a good point. That is coming out. And the only other things I will say are, if you like, for people who heard us talking about Rainbow Bridge, my remaster of my kids book, The Kitchen Witch, is out now from 2 and 5 Inc. And if you like me at Marvel, I would keep an eye on January. There's going to be a big announcement soon. And if you don't like me at Marvel, well, it sucks to suck, my friend, because I'm not going anywhere. And you'll find out more about that in the future.
If you don't like him at Marvel, meet him outside Javits for New York City. Challenge him to a fist fight. There are lots of arcane rules. If you beat him, you actually get to write Captain America.
You become him. It's kind of like a mantle.
That's true. That's how Cantwell got that job, actually. But little known fact.
You can find us at gatecrashers.fan or on social media at gatecrasherspod. Thanks for both for coming.
Thanks for having us back.
Gatecrashers.